Thank you, Verna, for grounding us tonight. My name is Carolyn Weitzman, and I'm a housing policy researcher with the Housing Assessment Resource Tools Project. HEART works with all levels of government to examine who needs what housing where and at what cost and how to enable it. But you don't need to be a researcher to know what ends homelessness. We did a big project 10 years ago called At Home Chez Soi, the world's largest housing first pilot project. It saved lives, it saved money. Then we stopped. What we know ends homelessness is low-cost housing with adequate health and social supports. We know what saves lives. It's for Indigenous, by Indigenous housing to address ongoing cultural inadequacies and injustices in the housing system. It's adequate income to afford housing, and it's preventing evictions into homelessness. We know how to do it. We just lack the political will to do what works. And I can't think of anyone better to get to the bottom of how to learn from what works than Catherine Cullen. Catherine is the host of CBC's award-winning program, The House, on CBC Radio and CBC Listen, and a senior reporter in the Parliament Hill Bureau. It's certainly a Saturday morning ritual for me to listen to Catherine. Catherine's also a familiar face to viewers of the National and the CBC News Network's Power and Politics. Catherine's worked in Montreal, Vancouver, Toronto, and Ottawa, and has guest hosted a wide variety of CBC programs from The Current and As It Happens to The World Report. Over to you, Catherine.
Thank you very much for that. So welcome, everyone, to Ending Homelessness is Possible, Lessons from Finland. Everyone can hear me okay? No, yes, in the back. Can you hear me in the back? You can't hear me in the back.
Thumbs up.
Okay, well, I'm gonna keep talking and our marvelous friends working sound are gonna fix this, but if we still have problems, holler at me. Tonight, we're gonna learn more about the remarkable progress that Finland has made in reducing homelessness. They are a country of about 5.5 million people, yet they have only about 3,000 people living without housing right now. They are the only country in the EU where homelessness is now on the decline, and their goal is to eradicate homelessness by 2027. Now, let's contrast that with just Ottawa, right? Just the city that all of us here are in tonight. We have folks listening virtually. The Alliance to End Homelessness Ottawa tells me that the latest statistics for the city show the numbers are jumping up yet again. So just in the city's various temporary shelters, there are more than 2,000 people. There are between 600 and 700 families staying in hotels and motels, and between 250 and 285 people who are sleeping outside. That is just in this city compared to what's happening in the entire country of Finland right now. So what we want to know tonight, how are you doing this? Here in Canada, where encampments are a reality in most cities across the country, even in the depths of winter, at a time when rising prices and housing scarcity is adding to pressure, can we borrow from Finland's success? Can we and should we do more of what you're doing here? So we've got a great mix of perspectives, as you can see on the stage tonight, to talk about this, all the way from Finland, two members of the Y Foundation, key players in the effort to end homelessness in Finland. They describe themselves this way: we rent affordable homes and eliminate homelessness. We're publicly beneficial and politically non-committed as an actor. They're Finland's fourth largest landlord, and they are big believers that this model can be exported elsewhere in the world. Teija Ojenkoski, I'm sorry, Teija, is the Y Foundation CEO, and Juha Kahila is head of international affairs. We have a couple of Canadian guests as well. Sean Fraser, Canada's Minister of Federal Housing, and Jocelyn Formsma is the CEO of the National Association of Friendship Centres. She's also board chair of the National Indigenous Collaborative Housing Inc., NICHI, and she's a member of the Moose Cree First Nation in Northern Ontario. Now, I have to admit, as someone who hosts a political show, when I have a cabinet minister in front of me, my first instinct is to put him on the hot seat. But tonight we're going to do things a little bit differently. Put your feet up.
Yeah,
and
lucky.
At least to start. I think it's really important that we spend some time on this question of what Finland is doing. We're going to try to understand what their model looks like and why it has been successful in reducing homelessness. Then we're going to turn to the Canadian perspective, and we're going to get some thoughts from both the minister and Jocelyn. Also to make sure we have a clear picture of what's happening in this country in terms of the existing programs and where there is clearly room to improve. I will say, while I would like you all to think that the minister might just wilt under the weight of my questioning when he runs off stage at 9 o'clock. He does have a flight to get to, and we're going to do our best to respect that and just excuse him when we sort of hit that mark. But I do hope that there's a bit of time at the end for all of us to just really exchange about what we've heard from the different perspectives and what will and won't. I don't even want to presuppose that, but you know, what we can learn from one another, and particularly, obviously, what we can learn from the two of you. So, everybody ready? Let's get started. Juha, I want to start with you because the whole idea of what you're doing in Finland centers around this idea of housing first, and that has a very particular definition for you folks. So help us see what that looks like. What is housing first in Finland?
Yeah, mic test, 1, 2, 1, 2, good, yeah. Yeah, so housing first in Finland, it's a little bit different compared to the model in US and Canada, for example, because we didn't know about the existing model of Sam Temperis when we formulated our own housing first model 2007. And then in Finland, housing first, I think the slogan could be home for all, not home for few. And I think the main difference is that our housing first is meant for all the people experiencing homelessness or those who are on the risk of becoming homeless. And we have 6 different factors behind the housing first. So first you need to have housing. And then we have different housing solutions for people because not one size fits for all. So 80% of the former homeless people, they live in scattered housing, individual apartments around the cities, and then the support is by home visits or they meet the support workers somewhere else. And then 20% of the former homeless people, they live in these housing first units, which means that there can be, for example, 40 apartments in one building, and then there is support services on site 24/7 downstairs and different kind of low threshold work activities as well. So when we have those 2 elements, that's usually housing first, call it a day. But we are not stopping there because we know that housing first doesn't work without having actually the housing first. So that's we have a quite sizable affordable housing stock in Finland. So we have around 400,000 affordable homes in Finland, and of course we want to link those homes also to the housing first program. And then, yeah.
Really see what that looks like. Obviously, this has changed the lives of a lot of people. Can you tell me the story of one person who has gotten not just the housing, but those support services and seen it change their lives?
Yeah, well, there is this one guy who is living in one of these housing first unit. I won't mention the name, but he's a man. He used to be a homeless people for many years. And just recently, there was BBC documentary about the work we are doing in Finland, and there he mentioned that, you know, without the home and the support, the other options would be jail or 6 feet under. And now he's doing great work in the unit. He has home of his own. He gets the support he needs. He takes part to the low threshold work activities. He's cooking the lunch for everybody in the building every day and these kind of things. So I think that gives a quite good preference what it's all about. It's saving lives.
When you talk about the support services, what kinds of supports might those be?
Support has to be always tailor-made, so whatever is people's challenges, they might have mental health issues, substance abuse issues, or some people need just a little bit, you know, how to change a light bulb, for example, how to make a nice dinner, so you don't need to use the microwave. So the support needs, they vary a lot, and that's why the support always has to be tailor-made for each individual needs.
As I understand it, it's also an important part of the program that people actually sign a lease, they pay what they can. Talk to me a little bit about what the intention is there.
Yeah, of course, it's a permanent housing. So people, they sign their own rental agreement, it's a permanent rental agreement, and then they pay the rent. Of course, the reality is that, you know, most of the people, when they get out of homelessness, they don't have a job, for example, but there's a quite good social security system in Finland which makes sure that they get the social benefits they need so they can pay the rent, and by the end of the day when they have paid the rent, they should have at least 500 euros, which I believe is around 700 Canadian dollars, to get by the month, buy the groceries and do all other things.
There are a lot of interesting things that surround this. One thing I found quite striking reading about it is that there aren't shelters right now in Finland in the way that we understand them here in Canada. Tell us about that.
Yeah, you are correct. So when we started Housing First 2008, one of the main things was that we knew that we need to change the whole system. And what we did is actually that when we have these Housing First units, they used to be shelters and temporary accommodation places. So we renovate most of those places into these permanent homes. And of course, that made a huge difference in people's situations.
So right now, if someone finds themselves homeless in Finland, though, what happens?
Well, we still have shelters. In the 1980s, when we had 20,000 homeless people, for example, in the city of Helsinki alone, there was 2,000 shelter beds in the whole city, and then now the number is 200. So we have decreased the number of shelter beds significantly. But of course, I think there is a need for some shelter beds and temporary accommodation as well. But of course, one of the main elements of the Housing First is that we try to prevent homelessness as well. So we have different tools for that.
If I understand, you have almost, I want to use the word task force, I don't think that's the right word, but a dedicated groups who their function is to prevent people from becoming
Yes, so we
homeless.
have these housing advice services. So that means that if anyone in Finland has some kind of problems to pay the rent, or they have disturbances with the neighbors, or any related issues with the housing, they can contact these housing advice services, and they will do everything in their power to help you in your situation. And I think one good example is that, for example, if you end up lose your job, you have no clue how to claim the unemployment benefit, for example. You can contact these services, and they help you to fill the form together and make sure that you can pay the rent or mortgage next month.
Taya, I want to bring you in here to talk a little bit about the politics of all of this. From what I understand, part of the reason that this has been possible in Finland, and it's something that the country has really leaned into since 2008 in particular, is because there is multi-partisan support, that all political parties have been on side with this. Talk to me a bit about how politically this became possible.
The cornerstone in Finnish housing policy and homelessness policy has been a common political will to work against homelessness. And 2008, that was the time when there was a financial crisis in the world and in Finland too, and we had a right-wing government, but they made a homelessness program inside the governmental program because they saw that if we solve the homelessness question, in the long run, it will pay back. It's an investment that will create good for everyone in society, not only for the homeless persons, but for everybody. And practically, we don't have any rough sleepers, for example, in Helsinki anymore. It's a great place for tourists and every citizen. So I think that's a very good result of that policy. But then it wasn't easy at all. But because all the parties negotiate and there's a debate and different perspectives, what is wise to do, is this just waste of money or so? But they found a common will. And since 2008, every government has got also a homelessness program in the governmental program. So that has been, and it has became a tradition to do that. And everyone can see that the results has been very good.
I'm fascinated by that moment of the political light
Yes.
sort of turning on. Was there public pressure that led to that, or was this really the government at the time seeing that this was something that would be appealing to constituents?
Both. But for example, the homelessness question, it created a difficult situation in the capital area, in Helsinki, for example, and the old methods didn't solve the problem. It stayed. although we have done pretty good work before. But then a powerful minister, Jan Vapaavuori, from the National Coalition Party, he had that vision that this is solvable, and he founded a group who made the ideas, how to solve this, what's the right way to do, and that was the moment when that group invited that Finnish way to do this housing first work. And we have been some kind of global laboratory in the world, and small country in Northern Europe. And you know, the statistics shows that we have been very good work. Only country in the EU, as he already described to you, only country in the EU, or maybe in the world, which has managed to reduce homelessness so radically. Since from the 1980s, we have reduced 80% the amount of homeless persons, 90% the families. And we don't have children on the streets or in the shelters or anywhere. So we have done it. I would say it has been very human and also economically very sustainable way.
So I'd like to ask you a question about cost and then about that political consensus. You make the point that it saves money, and I think intuitively a lot of people in this room probably understand that when people can live. When I looked at your principles, one of them is normality, right? That
yes,
people who are part of this program, they're able to lead normal lives. They have normal housing, which just when you say it out loud seems like it should be so self-evident.
Yes,
right?
and 2008, that was also a moment when we changed our mindset. We started to see homeless persons as human beings, not losers, numbers in the statistics or like that. They are people who need home and help to keep it.
But was there something that really clinched that change in public perception? Like, how do you think Finland got there?
I think those powerful persons and that powerful politician Jan Vapaavuori was the key person there.
But
you need powerful politicians to do this, because you can't make these so big changes through without politicians and political will and the money that they put there. And the state is in crucial role, and the government is in crucial role.
So the question of cost then, as I was saying, I think we all kind of intuitively understand that if people have housing and their needs are being met and they're not constantly in the emergency room or dealing with other kind of crises because of some of the problems that are a result in some cases of being unhoused, that especially in a country where we pay for healthcare, or the government is paying for healthcare, taxpayers are paying for healthcare, that would save money. But I still imagine that there's a significant upfront cost that comes with making decisions like that. So tell me a little bit about that part of the public discussion. We're going to have to put up a significant amount of money up front to become landlords, essentially.
Yeah. Finnish government put in the first 4-year period, they put 170 million euros to that program, and a little bit less next year's. But after those years, we have made calculations that the costs would have been more if we haven't made those changes and made a practical program. It has to be practical, and there's no trick to make this just during this week. We don't get the results in 1 week. It takes time to change the system in society and in administration and everything, those in the system. But we made a practical program, put goals, and we kept them. We did what we planned and what we promised for people. We involved municipalities, the biggest cities there, the NGOs, the social and healthcare system for that, and everyone had a role. And it was also co-working between different ministries.
So I'd like to ask you both just 2 questions about challenges, and then we're going to bring our Canadian friends into the discussion here. One thing that struck me when I was looking at some of the challenges that the Y Foundation has identified in moving forward with the last stages of this was services for people, for drug users. Here in Canada, we're dealing with a massive toxic drug crisis. It's certainly something we've talked a lot about on the program that I host. 22 people are dying on average every day of and so there is already an enormous challenge in this country to have adequate services to help people who are suffering. When you're trying to create a system where there are wraparound services and there's already a lack of services, tell me, like, how do you see that playing into the challenge of trying to set up a model like you're talking about?
It wasn't easy because maybe first, for example, some social workers didn't believe in this housing first model. It was a big change in mindset. But step by step we started to do that, and but of course to tailor-make the support people need, it needs time, and it has needed 2 decades now that we have created the system to work properly, and it has been adapted in the social and healthcare structure in the inside the services. So it need you need time, and you have to be patient. Yes, sorry. Sorry, we have talked so much about this subject during 2 days, so, but sorry for that.
Not at all.
But you have to be patient.
So the one other thing I want to point out that really struck me, maybe you, I'll have you weigh on this, is how much the levers of power were in control of governments and social organization. Helsinki owns 60,000 social housing units. 1 in 7 residents live in city-owned housing. It also owns 70% of the land within city limits, runs its own construction company, and has a current target of building 7,000. A city planner said, we own much of the land, we have a zoning monopoly, we run our own construction company. That is not the situation. Minister Fraser, I'm sure the word jurisdiction, I'm sure the word jurisdiction will come up tonight. That's not how it works around here. And I just wonder, as you're promoting this model, you've had such great success with this model, but surely not having control of so many levers is a challenge when other areas try to export what you're doing. Juha?
Yeah, maybe I can just add to the drug-related problems and the rehabilitation that, yeah, it's not a perfect model in Finland, and we really have challenges regarding the drug rehabilitation. So, for example, if I was using drugs and I have a momentum today, I go there and say that, hey, I want to enter into rehabilitation, and they would say, that's nice, you come back in March. So there is still challenges around that, and we need to work them around. So it's not perfect or sugar-coated anyway. And there is also one statistics in where what we are really not proud. So Finland is the #1 country in Europe when it comes to drug-related deaths among young people. So there is still a lot of work to be that we need to be addressed and do and be careful. But of course, yeah, like you mentioned, for example, in the city of Helsinki, they own 70% of the land, and their goal is to have 25% of affordable housing in all the new living areas and so on. But all of those things are based on a political commitment and political will on a municipality level, and then on a federal level as well. So there needs to be this kind of collaboration between the municipalities and the government to make these kind of things work. And for example, the Helsinki goal to have 25% affordable housing, they have a commitment with the government. It's not a legal thing or anything, but they have a commitment contract with the government that, hey, this is something that we need to do. And of course, and when they do this kind of commitment, there is also government who is putting some money to build those affordable homes. So there is state-subsidized housing involved in this whole thing.
In broadcast, we call that a beautiful transition.
Exactly.
And over to you. But I would like to get some reaction from Jocelyn, Minister. Minister, I'll start with you. Just what stood out to you about what you just heard?
Look, it's a proof point that big problems can be solved. One of the things that I actually was really excited about coming here today was to be sort of a member of the audience and to take some lessons for the work that I get to do every day. The reality is we often complicate problems because they're big in Canada, and part of it's driven by some of the jurisdictional challenges we have for sure. But when you actually see somebody else who's solving the problem, whether it's another country, whether it's a community, whether it's a city, it gives me faith that it can actually be done. One of the things that is just obvious when you say it out loud but becomes complicated in a Canadian context is making the case across levels of government that you are going to actually accrue the savings that will manifest if you make the investment up front. But convincing everybody else that their level of government will accrue those savings is a real political challenge. One of the things that I find presents a unique opportunity for Canada right now is the challenges around housing, around homelessness, around inadequate housing when it comes to non-market housing, is everybody seems to have woken up to this fact. The federal government, provincial governments, municipal governments, Indigenous leadership, right across the country, I do get the sense that everybody's pulling in the same direction. Undoubtedly, we're still going to have a hard time making the case to say the federal government will fund all of the cost of given projects when it may be a city that saves on those policing costs or a provincial government that saves on the health services. But I think if we can create a culture where we all come together to identify that there will be collectively systemic savings if we make the investment, the question then becomes how are we going to do it, not whether we are going to do it. I do get the sense that even the direct housing expenses, when you are not dealing with people who have temporary stays in hotels, you avoid the cost of having to build out shelter capacity and are actually focused on building the housing and plugging people into the housing opportunity with the services that they need. That seems to be the starting point that we're at in our conversations today. I shouldn't say starting point, it's been a long time getting here. What gives me faith is that we've been returning into the game of investing in non-market housing since about 2017 with the adoption of the National Housing Strategy. It's not perfect, it hasn't solved every problem, I don't mean to suggest it has. But we had a 30-year period before that where the federal government of Canada made a decision not to be investing in non-market housing, and we're paying for it today. But when I see the investments over what's frankly not that long a time horizon in Finland, it gives me faith that if we continue to work with people who know what they're talking about in their community, make the resources available to build out the infrastructure to put people in homes, within a reasonable period of time, it's not too far a stretch to imagine that homelessness can be eliminated in Canada. And frankly, I think if we stop short of that as the goal we strive for, we will have committed a moral failure, and I don't want to be the one at the end of my career who feels guilty of committing that failure.
You said something there, I really want to bring Jocelyn in here, but you said something there that really made me go, huh, which is you said, if we can create a culture, that is sort of pushing for this. Like, what does that really mean? Is that the federal government taking leadership to say this needs to be the issue? Are you talking about a sort of public pressure? Like, it feels a bit, I guess, abstract, and I'm trying to see what that would look like.
Yeah, it's both. And there's a question about political leadership and there's a question about political pressure that I think are both involved in this conversation. Absent political leadership, we will not solve big problems. We need to understand that there is an imperative to act. I sense that we are there, and I don't even mean we as a federal government. And by the way, I should acknowledge a colleague in the crowd. Mona, it's wonderful to see you here. Good to be in Ottawa with you. But provincial governments, municipal governments, leadership in Indigenous communities need to be pulling in the same direction. And I really do think we're there. But if this is going to lead to sustained investment, because we do need time, 30 years of no investment will not be cured overnight. You pointed out it's not going to be solved next week. But this is where the Canadian public needs to be part of that culture shift. If it becomes politically unacceptable to stop investing in housing for vulnerable populations, for low-income families, that will obviate the need for political leadership, because there will be a political imperative for anyone who would ever hope to be elected to continue to invest in housing for people who need it. My sense is the Canadian public is in a position where they are demanding governments do more for housing, and I think that culture shift has to happen both at the political level, but also amongst the Canadian public at a community level.
Jocelyn, you want to weigh in? We've got a lot of options to weigh in on there.
And my mind's been swimming with where do I start? But I think I'll start with some of the pressure points. So I think we've seen in real time what is possible when levels of government come together. I thought I was going to breach the jurisdiction issue. Working with urban Indigenous communities, certainly we feel the jurisdictional issue, and I think if anything we can demonstrate, if we take some of those jurisdictional barriers away, what is possible when you can work, kind of beyond jurisdictions and in collaboration. That should not be an excuse for inaction, and I think you would agree with me on that. But I think where I want to start is we've seen the ability to make heaven and earth move when there is the proper pressure. During the beginning weeks and months on COVID, we saw unprecedented collaboration amongst governments, amongst civil society. There was an urgent pressure that pulled and pushed everybody together and made us figure it out. I had never had so many conversations with so many people, in my entire life, in my career. And we need to find a way to kind of not necessarily manufacture, because I think the pressure exists, but really to focus that pressure to make sure we get to the point where it's, what is an acceptable level of people dying every year because we don't have homes for them, right? Do we have that number? I think that's a really crude way of putting it, but we would say none. Well, if the number is none, then what are we actually putting in place today, tomorrow, next week on that? And I think some of the pressure is going to come from, since it's sort of an international panel, in the world right now, we have shifted globally from the majority of people in the world living in urban spaces. It used to be around 50-50, a little bit more rural. We're feeling that in Canada, that the population is becoming increasingly urbanized, and you already said the statistics for Ottawa. If we don't figure this out now, in the 20 years that we're talking about that it's going to take to address this, we certainly are going to be back in a crisis mode, and I think everybody could agree we're already beyond that point, but we don't want to wait that long.
What do you feel is the biggest barrier right now? Like, do you think it is ultimately financial? Is it sort of, I don't think, I think we're all agreeing there's not apathy, but maybe not sufficient public pressure, jurisdiction. Like, what do you think is the biggest barrier? Because we're going in the wrong direction, we have to say, right? Like, we have an example of moving in the right direction. We can all see what's happening in this country. The homelessness situation is moving in entirely the wrong direction.
Yeah, I mean, I think it might be a bit of a I think the money will be there when we need it to be, as long as we have the right plan and I'll keep using the word pressures. I think that there's enough money floating within municipalities, provinces, federal government. They'll say, we don't have enough money, it's not enough money. But it seems that what we really need is the will and the decision making. I see a lot of decisions being made more politically than they are of what actually makes sense and following the evidence of what works. At the municipal, local level, we have things like zoning, and people can't stay here, they can't go there. We've created these rules, and one of the things that I say, like, everything in the world is made up, and so if we just made new rules, then it's possible. And I say it half jokingly, but I think with zoning and with policies and bylaws and things that we've kind of put in place, we've actually made it harder for ourselves to move on things. And then with legislation and codes, so we've kind of prevented not only ourselves as societies from being able to create proper housing and homes for ourselves in society, but we've also prevented people from being able to provide for themselves. And we've seen, like, with some, you mentioned the encampments. So when people are saying, like, we're being failed by every single institution that's supposed to prevent this from happening to us, when we actually take it into our own hands to create our own housing and keep ourselves warm and care for each other, then, you know, we have somebody coming with a bulldozer to take our belongings away. So we're not even allowing people to create something for themselves. We're saying that's unsafe, but we don't have an alternative for them.
Minister, I'm curious about this model that we're looking at in the context of your broader portfolio. Like, they say housing first. We don't have enough houses in this country. Like, my goodness, not a day goes by in my world of the news that we aren't talking about the fact that there aren't enough houses. So how could Canada adopt a housing first model when we just don't have enough houses? Does that put this kind of model off the table for the medium term? Put the political will and the money questions aside. Is it just not realistic for us right now?
So, well, it was interesting. I caught a phrase that one of our guests used. I think you said you can't have housing first unless you have the housing first. And I think just chew on that for a moment. The reality is we don't have enough homes in Canada for a country of our size with the family dynamics that we have compared to the family dynamics that existed when my grandparents were raising 10 kids in a single family home in rural Nova Scotia. We need to build homes, and we need to build them by the millions if we're going to even catch up to a level of affordability that existed 20 years ago, let alone make sure that everyone has a roof over their head, which should be the goal. So there's things we need to do to incentivize certainly development in the market, but we are talking about a different issue. There is not a market solution to homelessness. Governments need to act. We're going to need to build out the homes, but we are going to run into a bottleneck when it comes to the productive capacity of the Canadian workforce. There are more homes we can build with further public investment today. There are more homes the market can build if conditions shift by a few percentage points on interest rates, for example. But when it comes to the productive capacity, what I'm fascinated by, and I think you'll have something to share about this, the opportunity to build homes and factories is staring us in the face in Canada.
Like modular homes.
Yeah, modular homes, panelization, mass timber. We could get to a place where 3D printing is viable as well. The reality is if we don't change the way we build homes, we will not be able to solve this problem in a reasonable period of time. I think we can do it, though. The reason I think we can do it is because I'm actually meeting the people who are investing in factories today, the people who want to scale them up. And they need things like consistency and demand. They may need a little bit of help with the new piece of technology. But we need to demonstrate that there is going to be a consistent market. We've got a boom and bust cycle in Canadian real estate, and anybody who's thinking about building a factory is concerned that if they build it and open during a bust, they're going to lose the entire value of their company. If we can supplement some of the demand by creating a consistent supply of government-funded affordable housing projects, we might be able to provide a solution that will create that demand. We also need to be dramatically changing the way that we train the Canadian workforce and be tailored in our immigration programs to ensure we're welcoming the people who have the skills that we can't supply in Canada so we can actually help build the homes that we need. But fundamentally, if we continue to build homes one at a time in communities that are zoned for single-family homes, don't get me started on zoning reform, we're never going to solve the problem.
The stories you could tell about zoning.
Yeah.
I do want to ask you about one other aspect of this, because of course your government's been in power. Mr. Podium likes to say it all the time, 8 years of Justin Trudeau. You've been in power for 8 years now. And I am not purporting to suggest that everything bad is happening is the responsibility of your government, but as we are discussing...
It's actually me personally.
But as we were discussing, the current situation right now in terms of homelessness is very difficult. Your government has put money towards specifically trying to address the issue of homelessness. Your Reaching Home program, launched in 2019,